I knew they wouldn't come. Not because anyone said it outright, but because silence has a way of preparing you long before the truth arrives. The message came late the night before, short, polite, carefully worded so no one would feel guilty enough to change their mind.
Sorry, Victoria.
Things got crazy. Let's celebrate soon. For names. For variations of the same excuse. No one called. No one asked what time dinner was. No one even asked what I had planned. I read the message twice, then placed my phone face down on the kitchen counter. And still, the next morning I set the table. Not out of hope. I was past that. Out of habit. I ironed the tablecloth the way I always did, slow, precise movements, smoothing every crease as if someone might notice. The white linen had faint blue stitching along the edges, something I picked years ago because it felt dignified. I used to care about those things. I placed 4 plates, then paused, then added a 5th.
Mine.
Each chair had a place. Each place had a memory. Lucas used to sit closest to the window. Said he liked watching people pass by, even if there was nothing to see. He was always restless like that. Maya insisted on sitting across from me. So, I can see your face, she used to say when she was younger. As if I might disappear if she didn't. Ethan preferred the end of the table. Claimed it made him feel like he was in charge. He was 10 when he first said that. I remember laughing. And Sophie, always late, always dramatic, she never chose a seat. She drifted between them, like she never quite belonged to one place. I stood there for a moment, looking at the empty chairs, not sad, not angry, just aware. The oven hummed behind me. Roast chicken, potatoes, the same meal I had made for years, not because it was special, but because it was reliable. It held things together when nothing else did. I didn't expect them to walk through the door. But I also didn't cancel dinner. Because if I stopped doing things just because no one showed up, I wasn't sure what would be left of me. Around noon, the phone rang. I didn't pick up. I knew the voice that would be on the other end, careful, slightly rushed, maybe even relieved if I didn't answer. Hey, Victoria, we didn't think you'd actually cook. As if effort had an expiration date. As if love was something you only performed when it was convenient. I turned the stove down and poured the sauce into a small ceramic dish. I had owned it for years. I couldn't remember where it came from anymore. Funny how objects stay when people don't. I sat at the head of the table. My place. Always had been. The house was quiet. Not heavy, not suffocating, just still. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask for anything. I picked up my fork. 5 chairs. 1 woman. A meal meant for more. I took a bite. It tasted fine. Not perfect. A little dry, maybe, but good enough. That used to matter. When I was younger, I believed effort would always be seen. That if you showed up enough times, gave enough, held everything together long enough, someone would eventually notice. I was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not in a way that breaks you overnight. Slowly wrong. The kind that builds over years. Missed calls that become normal. Visits that turn into promises. Promises that turn into silence. I remember when the house used to feel full. Not just with people, but with need. There was always something to fix. Something to cook. Someone to comfort. I was necessary. Not always appreciated, but necessary. And I mistook that for love. After Daniel died, the house changed. It didn't become empty. It became wide. That's the only word I have for it. Wide in a way that made every sound echo. Every step noticeable. Every silence longer than it should be. I learned how to manage things alone. Bills, repairs, decisions I never wanted to make. I learned quickly because there was no alternative. And through it all, I kept cooking, even when I was tired, even when I didn't feel like eating, even when no one said thank you. Because cooking wasn't just about food. It was proof. Proof that the day existed, that I existed in it. So, when the message came last night, it didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how little it hurt. The real hurt had already passed. Years ago, when birthdays became texts, when visits became obligations, when I stopped being someone they came to and became someone they checked in on. There's a difference. A quiet one, but it changes everything. At 2 in the afternoon, I lit a candle, not because anyone would see it, because I would, because I was still here. The flame flickered slightly, reacting to a draft I couldn't feel. I watched it for a while, letting the moment settle into something real. I wasn't waiting anymore. That was new. I finished my meal slowly, without rushing, without filling the silence with unnecessary movement. When I was done, I didn't clear the table right away. I let it sit. 5 plates. 4 untouched. 1 empty. A story without witnesses. Or maybe finally one that didn't need any. For a long time, I believed being needed meant being loved. It took me years to understand how wrong that was. Because when people stop needing you, they don't always leave dramatically. Sometimes they just fade. And you don't notice until you're sitting at a table you set for others, realizing you're the only one still keeping the tradition alive. The candle burned lower. The light shifted across the room. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt clear. Not angry. Not even sad. Just finished waiting. I didn't clear the table right away. I left everything exactly as it was, as if time itself might hesitate and reconsider. The plates stayed where I'd placed them, the napkins still folded neatly beside forks no one touched, the candle burning lower with each passing minute. There was something almost ceremonial about it, not in a hopeful way, but in a final one, like closing a chapter not by slamming the book shut, but by letting the last page settle on its own. I stood by the window for a while, watching the street outside. People passed, cars slowed at the corner. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked, impatient and alive. Life, as always, continued without asking who had been forgotten that day. I wasn't expecting anything different, and yet there was a strange calm in realizing that nothing more was coming. No surprise visits, no apologies, no sudden change of heart. Just the truth, plain and undisturbed. Eventually, I began clearing the table, slowly, carefully, as if the dishes required more respect than usual. Porcelain against porcelain made a soft, familiar sound, one I had heard thousands of times before. I washed everything by hand, even though the dishwasher stood empty and ready. Some habits are less about efficiency and more about control. The warm water, the steady motion, the simple act of finishing something. It grounded me. When I was done, the kitchen looked untouched, as if nothing had happened at all. That used to bother me, the way effort disappears so easily. But now it felt different, lighter somehow, as if the absence of witnesses no longer erased the value of the act itself. I made myself tea, not because I was thirsty, but because it gave me something to hold. The cup warmed my hands as I sat down at the smaller table by the window, the one I rarely used before. It wasn't meant for gatherings, just for quiet moments I never allowed myself to have. Funny how quickly a space changes meaning when you stop waiting for someone else to fill it. My phone buzzed once. I didn't reach for it immediately. I let it sit there, vibrating briefly before falling silent again. When I finally picked it up, it was a message from Maya. Hey, I feel bad about today. We should plan something soon. I read it once, then again, noticing how carefully the words avoided responsibility. We should plan something. Not I'm sorry, not I should have been there. Just a vague suggestion, floating somewhere in the future where it wouldn't have to compete with anything urgent. I placed the phone back on the table without replying. It wasn't anger that stopped me. It was clarity. For years, I had answered every message, returned every call, accepted every half-offered plan as if it were something solid. I filled in the gaps for them, translated their absence into something softer, something easier to forgive. But sitting there, in the quiet of my own kitchen, I realized how much of that had been my own doing. I had made it easy. Too easy. Being available had become my default state, not because they demanded it, but because I never questioned it. And when you make something effortless for others, they rarely stop to consider its cost. The tea had gone slightly cooler by the time I took another sip. I didn't reheat it. Some things don't need to be restored once they lose their warmth. In the afternoon, I decided to go out. Not far, just enough to step outside the shape of the day. I put on my coat, the light gray one Daniel used to say made me look serious, and walked down the street at a steady pace. The air was crisp, carrying that early hint of change, though I couldn't quite name what kind. I passed the same houses, the same fences, the same familiar corners I had walked by for years. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt slightly different. Or maybe it was just me. At the corner, I stopped for a moment, watching the traffic light switch from red to green, then back again. I didn't need to cross. I just stood there, letting the rhythm settle into something quiet and predictable. For most of my life, I had moved with purpose. Every step tied to a task, a responsibility, a reason that involved someone else. Now, for the first time in a long while, I wasn't walking toward anything. I was just walking, and that, surprisingly, felt enough. I continued down to a small row of shops at the edge of the neighborhood. A bakery, a convenience store, an empty space that had once been a florist. I paused in front of the bakery window, looking at the cakes displayed inside. Perfectly arranged, untouched, waiting for someone to choose them. I didn't go in. Instead, I kept walking. Not out of denial, but out of decision. Back home, the house greeted me the same way it always did. Quiet, still, unchanged. But the silence no longer felt like something pressing against me. It felt like something I could step into without resistance. I took off my coat and placed it neatly by the door, then walked into the dining room. The table was clear now. No plates, no napkins, no evidence of what had been prepared for people who never came. Just the surface, clean and simple. I stood there for a moment, looking at it. Then I turned away. In the evening, the phone rang again. This time, I answered. Victoria. Ethan's voice, slightly hesitant. Yes. A pause. Hey, I just wanted to check in. Make sure you're okay. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. I'm fine, I said. Another pause, longer this time. We didn't think you'd, make a big dinner or anything. I leaned lightly against the counter, letting his words settle. I always make dinner, I replied. He exhaled softly, like he wasn't sure what to say next. Maybe we can all come by next weekend, he offered. Do something then. There it was again. Later.
Soon.
Someday. I won't be hosting anything next weekend, I said calmly. Silence. Oh, okay. Are you busy? Yes. It wasn't entirely true. I had no plans.
No invitations.
No schedule waiting for me. But for the first time, that didn't mean I was available. I see, he said, though it was clear he didn't. We spoke for another minute, exchanging polite, empty phrases that didn't lead anywhere. Then the call ended just like that. I placed the phone down and stood there for a moment. There was no rush of emotion, no lingering frustration, just a quiet understanding. Something had shifted. Not in them. In me. That night, I didn't sit at the dining table. I returned to the smaller one by the window, made a simple meal, and ate without setting extra plates, without imagining anyone arriving late. No waiting.
No adjustments.
Just presence. Before going to bed, I walked through the house, turning off lights one by one. The familiar routine felt different now, less like maintenance and more like choice. When I reached the bedroom, I paused at the doorway, looking at the space that had once been shared, then adapted, then simply existed. I stepped inside and closed the door gently behind me, not shutting anything out, just acknowledging that what remained was mine. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The next morning didn't feel heavier, and that was the first sign something inside me had truly changed. Usually, after a day like that, there would be some kind of aftertaste, regret, second thoughts, the urge to soften what had been said or done. But when I opened my eyes, all I felt was stillness. Not emptiness. Not relief. Just a clean, quiet sense that something unnecessary had finally fallen away. I got out of bed without checking my phone. That alone would have been unthinkable before. There used to be a kind of reflex in me, a need to stay connected, to respond quickly, to make sure no one felt ignored the way I sometimes did. But that morning, I let the phone sit untouched on the nightstand while I went through my routine slowly, deliberately. I made the bed, opened the curtains, let the pale morning light settle across the room without rushing to define the day. In the kitchen, I prepared breakfast with the same quiet attention I used the day before, but this time there was no echo of expectation behind it. No invisible audience. Just me, the kettle, the sound of water heating, the small rhythm of something being made without needing to be appreciated. I sat at the small table again, the one that had started to feel more like mine than any other place in the house, and ate without distraction. Only after that did I pick up my phone. There were messages. Of course there were. Ethan had sent another one late at night. Let me know if you change your mind. Maya followed with a longer message this time, something about work being overwhelming, about how things had been crazy lately, about how she really didn't mean for it to come across the wrong way. Sophie had reacted to the group chat with a heart, which somehow felt more distant than silence. And Lucas hadn't written anything at all, but I could see he had viewed my last status update. I read everything. Then I put the phone down again.
No replies.
Not out of punishment, not to make a point, but because for the first time, I wasn't compelled to fill the space they left behind. There's a difference between choosing silence and being silenced. I had spent years confusing the two. I cleaned the kitchen, wiped down the counters, and stood there for a moment with my hands resting lightly on the edge of the sink. The house felt the same, but I didn't. There was a clarity settling in, not dramatic, not loud, just steady. Like adjusting your posture after realizing you've been carrying something uneven for too long. Around mid-morning, I did something I hadn't planned. I opened the drawer near the hallway, the one I rarely touched anymore. Inside were envelopes, neatly stacked, each labeled in my handwriting.
Names. Dates.
Small notes in the corners reminding me why they existed. Emergency help. Rent support. Birthday extra.
Just in case.
I picked one up. Maya. Inside, a folded check I had written weeks ago, not yet sent. I remembered exactly why. I thought it might help her get ahead this month. I had imagined her relief, the quick thank you message, maybe even a call. I stood there holding it for a while. Then I placed it back in the envelope, closed it, and moved on to the next.
Ethan.
Lucas.
Sophie.
Different reasons, same pattern. I gathered all the envelopes and carried them to the kitchen table. The same table where I had eaten alone the night before. The same place where something had quietly shifted. For years, I told myself I was helping. And I was. But I was also maintaining something that no longer existed the way I believed it did. Support had turned into expectation. Giving had turned into background noise. Something constant enough that no one thought to question it, including me. I sat down and opened each envelope one by one, not rushing, not hesitating either. The paper felt light in my hands, almost insignificant compared to the weight I had attached to it over time. I stacked everything into a single pile, neat and orderly, the way I always preferred things. Then I got up, walked to the cabinet, and placed the entire stack inside a plain box.
No labels.
No names. Just paper. It wasn't an act of anger. It wasn't even an act of defiance. It was correction. For the first time in a long time, I was adjusting something that had been left unexamined for too long. Around noon, I decided to go out again. Not because I needed anything, but because staying inside felt like repeating something that had already ended. I put on my coat and walked with a little more certainty than the day before, my step steady, my pace unhurried but intentional. This time, I didn't stop at the corner. I kept going, further than usual, past the bakery, past the empty florist, all the way to the bank at the end of the street. I hadn't planned to go in when I left the house, but I went in anyway. The air inside smelled faintly of paper and something sterile, something that always made conversations feel more serious than they were. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile, the kind that doesn't linger. "I'd like to make some changes to my accounts," I said. She nodded, directed me to a desk, and within a few minutes, I was sitting across from a man who introduced himself as Daniel. He spoke in a calm, practiced tone, the kind designed to reassure without asking too many questions. "What kind of changes are you looking to make?" I folded my hands lightly in front of me. "I'd like to cancel all recurring transfers," I said. He blinked once, then nodded slowly, pulling up my account information. "All of them?" "Yes." There was a brief pause, not long enough to be uncomfortable, but long enough to acknowledge that something about the request was unusual. "We can certainly do that," he said. "Are you sure you don't want to keep any of them active?" "I'm sure." He didn't press further. We went through the forms, the confirmations, the small procedural steps that turn decisions into reality. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. If anything, I felt more present than I had in a long time. When it was done, he printed the final document and slid it toward me. "Everything has been updated," he said. "The changes will take effect immediately." Immediately. I nodded, signed where needed, and stood up. "Thank you," I said. As I walked out of the bank, the air outside felt sharper, clearer. Not colder, just more defined. Like stepping into a space where nothing is blurred anymore. I didn't feel guilt. That surprised me. I had expected at least a trace of it, some hesitation, some second-guessing. But there was none. Because for the first time, I wasn't taking something away. I was returning something to myself. When I got home, the house felt different again, not because anything had changed physically, but because something invisible had shifted its place. I took off my coat, placed it on the hook, and walked into the kitchen. The small table by the window caught the light, just right. I sat down. No phone in my hand. No messages waiting to be answered. No plans needing to be rearranged. Just me. And the quiet. Not empty. Not lonely. Chosen. I rested my hands on the table and allowed myself to sit in that moment without rushing past it, without explaining it, without softening it into something easier to accept. Because this time, I didn't need to. For years, I had given without asking what it cost me. Now, for the first time, I had stopped, and in that pause, something unexpected had appeared.
Space. Not the kind that separates people.
The kind that lets you finally see yourself clearly. The silence didn't last. I knew it wouldn't. It never does when something familiar disappears. People don't always notice presence, but they notice absence almost immediately, especially when it affects them directly. I had lived long enough to understand that pattern, even if I hadn't always applied it to my own life. The first call came late in the morning. I was in the kitchen, slicing fruit slowly, not because I needed to, but because I had learned to let small actions stretch across time without urgency. The phone rang once, then stopped. A second later, it rang again. I didn't rush to answer, but I didn't ignore it either. Maya, I said, picking up. Victoria, hey. Her voice was tight, controlled, like she was trying to keep something from slipping out too early. I think something's wrong with the bank. I leaned lightly against the counter, knife still in my hand. What do you mean? My card got declined this morning, she said quickly. I checked, and the transfer didn't go through. Did something happen on your end? There it was. Not, how are you? Not, I've been thinking about you. Just a disruption. Yes, I said calmly. I made some changes. A pause. Oh, okay, she said, but the tone had shifted now, uncertainty creeping in. You didn't tell me. I didn't think I needed to. Another pause, longer this time. Well, I mean, it just would have been good to know, she added carefully, so I could plan. I let that sit between us for a second. I'm sure you will, I said. She exhaled, soft but audible. Are you upset about the other day? She asked, finally circling toward it.
No.
The answer came easily because it was true. Then why? I'm not upset, I repeated, not louder, just clearer. I'm done. Silence. Not confusion. Not misunderstanding. Recognition.
She didn't argue.
She didn't push. She didn't apologize either. The call ended shortly after, polite, unfinished, carrying more questions than answers. I placed the phone back on the counter and finished slicing the fruit. Nothing dramatic followed. No wave of emotion.
No sudden regret.
Just the continuation of a morning I had already chosen. By noon, the messages started. Ethan. Hey, did something change with the transfers? Sophie. My payment didn't go through. Is everything okay? Lucas didn't message, but he called.
Twice.
I didn't answer. Not because I was avoiding him, but because I no longer felt obligated to respond immediately. That had been the pattern before, availability mistaken for necessity. Now I was learning the difference. I let the phone sit. Eventually, it stopped ringing. The house remained quiet, but the quiet had a different texture now. It wasn't just stillness. It carried movement somewhere beyond the walls. Reactions, conversations, assumptions forming without me present. For years, I had been part of everything. Now I wasn't. And strangely, that didn't feel like loss. It felt like distance. And distance, I was beginning to understand, wasn't always a negative thing. In the afternoon, I went into the living room and sat in the armchair Daniel used to prefer. It still held the shape of him in some subtle way, not physically, but in memory. I used to avoid sitting there too long. It felt like stepping into something unfinished. Now, it felt like a place I could finally occupy without hesitation. The phone buzzed again. This time, I picked it up. Ethan. Victoria, he said immediately, his voice sharper than before. What's going on? I told Maya. I made changes. Yeah, she said that, but what does that mean exactly? He asked. Is this temporary or?
No.
He paused. No, what? No, it's not temporary. Another pause, this one heavier. You're just stopping? He asked, as if saying it out loud might make it less real. Yes. Why? I leaned back slightly in the chair, letting the question settle before answering. Because I should have a long time ago. That doesn't really explain anything, he said, a hint of frustration slipping through now. It explains enough. He exhaled, louder this time. Is this about your birthday? He asked.
No.
Then what is it about? I considered the question, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to say it without unnecessary weight. It's about me, I said. Silence. You're serious, he said finally. Yes. He didn't argue after that. Didn't try to convince me. Didn't apologize. The call ended not with resolution, but with something else, an awareness that the structure they relied on had shifted, and they weren't sure how to stand without it. I set the phone aside and looked around the room. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. For years, I had been the invisible center of something that no one acknowledged because it functioned without interruption. Now that it had stopped, they were noticing not me, but the absence of what I provided. That difference mattered, more than I had allowed myself to admit before. As the day moved into evening, the messages slowed. Not because the situation had resolved, but because they had begun talking to each other instead of to me. I could almost map the conversations without hearing them, questions, assumptions, maybe even frustration directed outward instead of inward. That used to pull me in, make me want to explain, to smooth things over, to restore balance. Now I let it happen without interference. Not out of indifference, out of decision. I made myself dinner, something simple again, and ate at the small table by the window. The light outside had softened, casting long shadows across the street. People were returning home, carrying their own versions of the day with them. I didn't compare mine to theirs. For once, I didn't measure anything. After eating, I cleaned up, turned off the lights in the kitchen, and walked slowly through the house. The routine was the same, but the meaning behind it had shifted. I wasn't maintaining a space for others anymore. I was living in it. Before going to bed, I checked my phone one last time. There was a message from Sophie. Victoria, I don't really understand what's happening, but I think we should talk. This feels serious. I read it carefully. Then I locked the screen. Not because it wasn't serious, but because for the first time, I didn't need to explain the seriousness of something they had only just begun to notice. I turned off the light and lay down, the room settling into darkness around me.
No noise. No expectations.
No waiting. Just the quiet recognition that something had shifted beyond repair, not in a way that destroyed anything, but in a way that made it impossible to return to what it had been. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't wonder what would happen next, because whatever it was, it would not be built on what I used to give. The next morning was quieter than the one before, but not in the same way. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from absence. It was the kind that follows movement, like something had already begun shifting somewhere beyond my reach. I could feel it without needing to see it. The calls had slowed, The messages had stopped, and that alone told me everything I needed to know. They were talking to each other now, trying to understand something that had never required explanation before. I didn't check my phone right away. I made breakfast, the same as the previous days, steady and unhurried. There was comfort in repetition, not because it kept things the same, but because it reminded me I could exist without reacting to everything around me. I sat at the small table, watching the light move slowly across the surface, letting the day begin without interruption. When I finally picked up the phone, there was only one new message. From Lucas. I think something's wrong. Call me when you can. I read it twice, not because it was confusing, but because of how familiar it sounded. Something's wrong. For years, that phrase had meant something immediate, an emergency, a problem that needed solving, something I would step into without hesitation. But now, sitting there with the phone in my hand, I understood what he really meant. Something had changed, and he didn't know how to categorize it. I didn't call him back. Not yet. Instead, I placed the phone face down and finished my tea. There was no urgency in me anymore. That was the difference. Around mid-morning, the phone rang. I let it ring once.
Twice.
Then I answered. Victoria, Lucas said, his voice sharper than usual, less controlled. What's going on? I imagine you already know, I replied. No, I don't, he said quickly. I've heard things, but I want to hear it from you. I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting the conversation settle before moving it forward. I stopped the transfers, I said. Yes, I know that, he replied, frustration slipping through now. But why? Because I chose to. That's not really an explanation, he said. It is, I answered. There was a pause, longer than the others had been. Did someone say something to you? He asked. Did something happen? I almost smiled at that. The need to locate a cause, to assign responsibility, to believe that something external must have triggered this. No, I said. Nothing happened. Then why now? He pressed. I considered the question carefully, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted him to hear it clearly. Because I noticed, I said. Noticed what? That I had become something you all relied on without really seeing. Silence. Real silence this time. Not confusion. Not hesitation. Understanding. That's not fair, he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. It's accurate, I replied. We didn't ask you to do all of that, he added quickly. No, I said. You didn't. Another pause. So, what this is it, he asked. You're just cutting everything off? Yes. And that doesn't seem extreme to you, he said.
No.
The simplicity of the answer seemed to catch him off guard. You could have talked to us, he said after a moment. I'm talking to you now. That's not the same, he replied. No, I agreed. It's not. Because before, I would have explained myself before making the decision. Now, I was explaining it after. That difference mattered. He didn't know how to respond to that. I could hear it in the way his breathing changed slightly, in the way the conversation lost its direction. This isn't like you, he said eventually. I looked out the window as he spoke, watching a car pass slowly down the street. It is, I said. You just haven't seen it before. The call ended shortly after. No resolution. No agreement. Just a shift that neither of us tried to undo. I placed the phone down and sat there for a moment, letting the quiet return to its place. It came easily now, without resistance, without the need to fill it. By early afternoon, something else changed. Not outside. Inside. For years, my days had been structured around others, what they needed, when they needed it, how quickly I could respond. Even when they weren't present, they shaped the rhythm of everything. Now, for the first time, that structure was gone. And in its place, there was space. Not empty space. Unclaimed space. I walked through the house slowly, noticing things I had stopped seeing a long time ago. The hallway that always caught the light in the afternoon. The slight creak in the third floorboard near the stairs. The way the living room felt larger when it wasn't arranged for conversation. None of it was new, but it felt new, because I was finally experiencing it without interruption. Around 3, there was a knock at the door. I didn't expect anyone, and for a brief moment, I considered not answering. But I did. It was Sophie. She stood there without her usual confidence, her posture slightly uncertain, her hands empty. No phone in hand, no practiced expression, just her.
"Hi," she said. "E."
I was nearby, she added, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. I stepped aside.
"Come in."
She walked in slowly, her eyes moving across the room as if she were seeing it differently now. "It feels different," she said quietly. "It is," I replied. We stood there for a moment before she sat down on the edge of the couch. I remained standing, not out of distance, but because I didn't feel the need to rush into familiarity. "I don't really understand what's happening," she said. "You don't need to," I answered. "I think I do," she said, looking up at me, "because this doesn't feel small." "It isn't." She nodded slightly, absorbing that. "Are you angry?" she asked.
"No."
"Then what is it?" I walked over and sat in the chair across from her, not too close, not too far. "It's clarity," I said. She frowned slightly, not in disagreement, but in effort. "That doesn't sound like something that changes everything," she said. "It does when you've been ignoring it for a long time." She looked down at her hands, then back at me. "We didn't mean to make you feel like that," she said carefully. "I know," I replied. "And that makes it worse somehow," she added quietly. I didn't respond immediately, because she was right. It wasn't intentional. It was gradual. And that's what made it harder to point to, harder to argue against. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends," I said. "On what?" "On what you choose to do now that you see it." She didn't answer right away, and I didn't expect her to, because understanding something and changing because of it are not the same thing. She stayed for a while after that. We didn't talk much more about it. Just sat in the same space, letting the silence exist without trying to shape it into something comfortable. When she finally stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. "This isn't over, is it?" she asked.
"No," I said.
But not in the way she meant. Because what had ended wasn't the relationship. It was the version of it that no longer worked. And that doesn't start again. It gets rebuilt. Or it doesn't. After she left, I closed the door gently and stood there for a moment. The house was quiet again, but not empty, not waiting, just steady. And for the first time, I understood something clearly. They thought something was wrong, but nothing was wrong. Something was finally right. The house felt settled in a way I hadn't noticed before, as if it had adjusted to me instead of the other way around. There was no tension in the air, no lingering sense that something needed to be fixed or explained. Just space, steady and uninterrupted. I moved through the morning without checking my phone, without anticipating anything. That absence of expectation had become the most noticeable change of all. For years, even silence had felt temporary, like something that would eventually be broken. Now it felt complete. When I finally looked at my phone, there were no missed calls. That more than anything, told me something had shifted on their side as well. The urgency was gone. The repeated attempts to reach me had stopped. They had stepped back, not necessarily out of understanding, but because they didn't know what else to do. Distance had settled in, not the kind created by time or geography, the kind created by awareness. I made tea and stood by the window, watching the street come alive in small, ordinary ways. A man walking his dog, a delivery truck stopping briefly at the corner, a child dragging a backpack that looked too heavy for her size. Life moved forward, unbothered by the quiet rearrangement happening inside my world. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was falling behind it. I sat down at the small table again, wrapping my hands around the cup, letting the warmth settle in slowly. My thoughts weren't crowded. There was no need to replay conversations, no urge to justify anything I had done. The clarity remained, steady and unshaken. By midday, the first sign of movement came. Not a call, an email from Ethan. Subject: we need to talk.
No greeting. No explanation. Just that.
I opened it. Read the single line inside. This isn't like you. I think something's wrong, and we should figure it out. I stared at the screen for a moment, then closed it. Not because it upset me, because it confirmed something. They still believed this was a problem to solve. Something temporary. Something that could be explained, corrected, restored. They didn't understand that what had changed wasn't situational. It was structural.
I didn't reply.
Not immediately. Instead, I got up and walked into the living room, letting the thought pass through me without attaching to it. The chair near the window caught my attention again, the one I had started using more often. I sat down, leaning back slightly, allowing myself to feel the stillness without questioning it. A few minutes later, there was another message, this time for Maya. We're worried about you. I read it slowly, not because it was complex, because of what it implied. Worry,
Concern.
as if my decision to step back meant something was wrong with me. I placed the phone on the armrest and let out a quiet breath. For years, I had been the stable one, the one who handled things, the one who didn't create complications. And now that I had changed that pattern, the only explanation they could find was that something must be wrong. Not with the situation. With me. I didn't feel offended. I understood it. When people are used to a version of you, anything outside of it feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar often gets labeled as a problem. In the afternoon, I decided to go out again. Not for distraction, not to avoid anything, but because I had begun to enjoy the simple act of moving through the day without being pulled in different directions. I walked further this time, past the usual route, into parts of the neighborhood I hadn't visited in years. There was a small park I used to pass by when everything was busier. I hadn't stepped inside it in a long time. I paused at the entrance, then walked in slowly, taking in the space without rushing. A few people sat on benches, some reading, some simply watching the world move around them. No one paid attention to me, and for once, that didn't feel like invisibility. It felt like freedom. I sat down on an empty bench and let myself stay there without checking the time, without calculating how long I should remain before moving on. The air was calm, carrying just enough movement to remind me I was part of something larger than my own thoughts. For a long time, I had filled every quiet moment with purpose. Now, I was learning to let moments exist without one. When I returned home, the phone rang almost immediately. I looked at the screen. Lucas. I answered. Victoria, he said, his voice more controlled than before, but still carrying tension beneath it. We need to talk about this. We already are, I replied. No, I mean properly, he said. All of us. I leaned against the wall, letting his words settle. There's nothing to discuss as a group, I said. There is, he insisted, because this affects all of us. Yes, I said. It does. And you don't think we should be part of the conversation? He asked. You're part of it, I replied. You're just not the ones making the decision. Silence. You're shutting us out, he said.
No, he answered calmly.
I'm stepping back. That's the same thing, he said. It isn't. He exhaled sharply. It feels like it, he added. I understand that, I said. Another pause. We're trying to figure out what's going on, he said. We're concerned. I know. Then help us understand, he pressed. I considered that, for a moment, not because I owed him an explanation, but because I wanted to be precise. There's nothing to fix, I said. That's what you're not seeing. That doesn't make sense, he replied. It will, I said. Just not right away. He didn't respond to that, because some things don't become clear through explanation. They become clear through time. The call ended without resolution, just like the others. I set the phone down and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet return once again. It came easily now, naturally, like something that belonged. As the evening settled in, I moved through the house without thinking about what had been said or what might come next. I made dinner, ate at the small table, and let the day close without trying to define it. There was no urgency in me anymore. No need to anticipate the next conversation, the next reaction, the next attempt to pull me back into something I had already stepped away from. For the first time, I understood what distance really meant. It wasn't about separation. It was about perspective. About seeing things clearly enough to choose where you stand. Before going to bed, I checked my phone one last time. No new messages. No missed calls. Just stillness. I turned off the light and lay down, the room settling into darkness around me. And as I closed my eyes, I realized something that hadn't been obvious before. They expected me to come back, to soften, to adjust, to return to the version of myself they understood. But I wasn't going to, not this time, because this distance wasn't something that had been created between us. It was something I had finally created for myself, and I wasn't ready to give it up. The morning of my birthday came without announcement. No midnight messages. No early calls. No notifications lighting up the room before I opened my eyes. Just quiet, steady, and complete, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask to be filled. I woke up slowly, not because I was tired, but because there was no reason to rush into anything. For the first time in years, the day didn't feel like something waiting for others to define it. I sat up in bed and stayed there for a moment, letting the stillness settle into something I could recognize. There was no disappointment in me, no expectation left to break. That part had already passed. What remained was something simpler, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Ownership. I got up, moved through my morning without checking my phone, without looking for anything that might confirm or contradict the day. I opened the curtains and let the light in fully, not filtering it, not softening it. The room filled with a pale, even brightness that made everything visible exactly as it was. In the kitchen, I made tea and lit a single candle. Not for celebration, for acknowledgement. I placed it in the center of the table, not the dining table, not the one meant for others, but the small one by the window. The one that had become mine over the past days. I sat down, wrapped my hands around the cup, and watched the flame move slightly with the air. 82. I said it quietly, not out loud, but clearly enough in my own mind to give it weight. 82 years of showing up. 82 years of building, giving, adjusting, waiting. And now, finally, choosing. I didn't set the big table this time. That was the difference. No extra plates.
No folded napkins.
No chairs arranged for people who might not come. The dining room remained untouched, the surface of the table clean, simple, free of expectation. It didn't feel empty. It felt honest. I spent the morning slowly, moving between rooms without purpose, but not without direction. I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years, sorted through things that no longer needed to be kept, let go of objects that had outlived their meaning. Not everything, just enough to feel the shift continue in small, deliberate ways. Around noon, I stepped outside. The air was calm, the kind that doesn't push against you, doesn't demand anything. I walked to the garden, the one Daniel and I had started years ago. It had grown uneven over time, parts of it neglected, parts of it stubbornly holding on. I knelt down slowly, touching the soil, feeling its texture between my fingers. There was something grounding in that, something real. For so long, I had invested my energy into things that depended on others to be completed. Now I was placing it into something that responded directly, honestly, without interpretation. I stood up, brushed my hands lightly, and went back inside. The phone was still on the table where I had left it, silent. I picked it up, not out of anticipation, but out of curiosity. There were messages now. Several. Ethan, happy birthday. We should talk. Maya, thinking of you today. Sophie, I hope you're doing okay. Lucas, call me when you can. I read them all, slowly,
Carefully.
not searching for meaning between the lines, just seeing them for what they were. Acknowledgement, late but present. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I placed the phone back down and sat there for a moment, letting the reality of it settle without rushing to respond. This was new, not the messages, the choice. For years, I would have answered right away, softened the distance, reassured them, brought everything back into balance as quickly as possible.
But now,
I didn't feel the need to restore anything, because nothing needed to return to what it had been. Around 2 in the afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Not hesitant, not loud, just clear. I stood up, walked slowly across the room, and opened it. They were all there. Lucas, Maya, Ethan, Sophie.
no gifts, no flowers.
No carefully arranged gestures to smooth over what had been done. Just them, standing there without certainty. For a moment, no one spoke. Not because they didn't have anything to say, because they didn't know how to begin. And for once, I didn't help them. I stepped aside.
Come in, I said.
They entered quietly, not moving toward the dining room, not looking for the table that used to define our gatherings. Instead, they followed me into the living room, where the space felt smaller, closer, more real. We sat, not in our usual places, not arranged, just present. It was Lucas who spoke first. We didn't plan what to say, he admitted. I can see that, I replied. Maya looked at me carefully. You didn't set the table, she said.
No, y ensurat.
That seemed to land more heavily than anything else. Ethan leaned forward slightly. We know we've been distant, he said. More than we should have been. I didn't interrupt, didn't correct, didn't soften. Sophie looked down at her hands before speaking. I didn't realize how much of you we were depending on without actually showing up, she said quietly. That was closer. Not perfect, but closer. Lucas exhaled slowly. We thought something was wrong, he said. With you. I nodded slightly. I know. And now, he asked. Now you're starting to see that nothing is wrong, I replied. Silence. but not the same kind as before. This one held attention, responsibility, presence. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, Maya said. They won't, I answered. And I don't think they should, she added. That mattered. Not because it fixed anything, but because it acknowledged something real. Ethan looked around the room. It feels different here, he said. It is, I replied. Not because of them. Because of me. We sat there for a while, the conversation moving slowly, without urgency, without the need to resolve everything at once. There were no promises made, no plans set, no immediate attempt to rebuild what had been lost. And that was the point, because this wasn't about returning. It was about beginning differently. At some point, Sophie looked at me and asked the question they had all been circling around. What happens now? I considered it for a moment, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted them to hear it clearly. You show up, I said, not occasionally, not when it's convenient, not when something is missing. You show up because you choose to, I continued, not because you expect something in return. They nodded, not all at once, but enough. Because understanding doesn't happen in unison. It happens individually. And that was enough for now. They stayed for a while longer. Then, one by one, they stood up. No one rushed to leave. No one lingered unnecessarily. Just a quiet, balanced exit. At the door, Lucas paused. Can we come back? He asked. I looked at him for a moment, not measuring the past, not predicting the future, just answering honestly. Yes, I said, but not the way you used to. He nodded. I understand. And this time, I believed him. After they left, I closed the door gently and stood there for a moment. The house was quiet again, but not the same quiet as before. This one wasn't empty. It was full, not with people, with something else, something steady, something earned. I walked back to the small table, the candles still burning, the flames smaller now but still present. I sat down, looked at it for a moment, then reached out and extinguished it, not because the day was over, because it had been acknowledged. And as the room settled into its natural light, I realized something simple and undeniable. I hadn't lost anything. I had just stopped giving it away. And finally, I was still here.